Hey, and welcome back to Animation Study Group, the series where I, a beginner in animation, encourage you to follow along as I work my way through this, the Animator's Survival Kit by Richard Williams. This is episode 6. It's part 2 of a 2-part exercise where I've been comparing straight-ahead animation to pose-to-pose animation. In episode 5, we took a pose-to-pose approach and animated a face that started off frowning and ended the animation smiling. For this video, I created a similar animation, but I used a straight-ahead approach. This episode's a little different than the last 5. I've actually already animated the exercise, so I know the end result, and I feel like it's important to preface what you're about to see. I've said something similar to this before, but I don't mind saying it again. These exercises are practice. The end result is not intended to be a final product. I'm showing you the learning process from a beginner's perspective. I'm emphasizing this ahead of the exercise you're about to see because I don't particularly love the end result. However, the practice itself helped me understand the differences between straight-ahead animation and pose-to-pose animation. And ultimately, that was the point. I hope that sentiment might be encouraging to other beginners out there, because the reality is, at least for me, you might not exactly love what you're producing while you're practicing, but you come out of each iteration with new lessons learned. With that said, let's get into the usual sped up animation process section of the video. And after that, I'll play the animation and we can go over what I learned about these two different approaches. Okay, here's the end result. This is the face frowning to face smiling animation done straight ahead. I didn't discuss the definition of straight ahead animation in the intro of the video because I went over this in part 1, but here's a quick review of the differences between pose to pose and straight ahead. The pose to pose approach is going to start with your keyframes, which are the most important storytelling drawings. Then the animation chart is divided into smaller and smaller segments through the in-betweening process. Pose to pose felt kind of like working your way in from either end of your animation chart, at least to me. In contrast, straight ahead, you're animating frame over frame over frame without developing your chart. Straight ahead felt kind of like trying to build something with no instructions. Let's get into what I liked and didn't like about the straight ahead exercise. First, the likes. I think that the end result here is a little more expressive than the pose-to-pose version. Because the chart wasn't plotted out beforehand, I made some decisions as I went, like the eyes closing before the face actually smiles, or what looks kind of like a chuckle at the end of the animation. With straight-ahead animating, it feels like you're able to improvise a little more based on how your drawings are coming out, or the direction they're organically going, which is pretty fun. As far as dislikes, I found it even more challenging with straight ahead animating to keep my shapes consistent over time. I had similar challenges with the pose to pose exercise, but because I had my first keyframe, my in-between, and my second keyframe already mapped out, those changes were less extreme. In this animation, you'll see the nose really changes shape a lot. There's some unnatural motion in parts of the face. I decided not to nitpick the problems too much or clean this up at the end because I really wanted to see the difference between the two approaches. Another thing that happened while I was animating this one is that the face drifted across the canvas over time. I did quickly compensate for that with the animation tool, and that's just so I could more easily compare this to the pose-to-pose animation at the end of this video. Another thing that happened, which was kind of interesting, is I did try to target the same number of frames as the pose-to-pose animation, but because I ended up with that sort of chuckling motion at the end, I duplicated some frames and I ended up with a longer end result than what I initially planned for at the beginning. Since this approach is a little more improvisational and it's not exactly charted out, it's easy for things to kind of sprawl out, get longer, change over time, etc. I certainly had an easier time with the pose-to-pose approach. As a reminder, this was the pose-to-pose exercise. And this was the straight ahead. I changed the colors here so that I could overlap these and see how the motion is different at the same time, and that looks totally crazy, but here it is. Yikes. All right, that about does it for this episode. All in all, I think I understand a lot better the difference between these two approaches to animating. In the next video, we're going to take a look at kind of combining the two approaches, which the book recommends as a nice way to combine the planning methods of pose to pose with the spontaneity and improvisation of straight ahead. That's going to be a pretty complex exercise, so it might take me a while to put that one together. As always, thanks for watching and thanks for following along. If you're working your way through these exercises, I'd be interested to see what you're working on as well, so feel free to drop a link down in the comments below. And until next time, take care.